You're watching Fugitive Redeye, and welcome to another episode of Redeye Responds. As you may know, I've talked about it on the channel before, but Ichi the Killer is my favorite manga. Now, it has been a minute since I've read it, so when I'm responding to this video, I'm going completely off memory. So any inaccuracies that may arise will be because of that. However, I think I'm going to be pretty accurate. It's a very interesting, dark, and fucked up story. I actually bought a copy of it in Japanese. I've read it in English on fan translations, but I do have the actual physical series as well. But with that in mind, knowing that Ichi the Killer is my favorite manga, today we'll be jumping into a video of someone who has a very different opinion on Ichi the Killer than me. So let's jump in.
And this manga was not good.
What the fuck?
Well, I completely disagree with that, as you know, since it is my favorite manga. Obviously, I completely disagree with that statement, but let's hear him out.
I don't even know where to start. Let me get this out of the way. Regardless of my own personal thoughts and opinions on this story, I do want you to go read it for yourself to come up with your own conclusions. I'm not some sort of judge of manga.
And that's fair. I also recommend you go read it because it's fucking great. But saying you're not some sort of judge of manga, that's kind of weird to say because that's literally what you're doing is judging a manga. I'm not saying you can't do that. I'm saying everyone has the right to review things. I'm just saying you're not a judge of manga and then proceeding to judge a manga seems a little confusing to me. Because I'm judging the manga too, just in a much less harsh way than you are because I fucking love it. So, to say I'm not some sort of quote-unquote judge of manga, I get he's saying he's not like an authority on it, he's not the end-all be-all, I like what he's trying to get at there. I just think he phrased it a little weird.
With that out of the way, this is by far the worst seinen manga I've read. And
you're not just wrong, you're stupid. And you're ugly, just like your mum.
I think that's a bit harsh, calling it the worst seinen you've ever read. There's plenty of bad seinen out there, so I think that's a little bit of a stretch there. But hey, I mean, again, everything is relative in this, but I do think that there's much worse stuff out there, like both objectively and subjectively, obviously, for me. I think there's plenty of things that make a lot less sense, and obviously there's a lot of things I don't like as much.
Let me just get into it. I do kind of feel bad because there's somebody who's been recommending me this for like almost 200 days now, so bro, I'm so sorry.
Yeah, you know, I would hate to be that guy. It always sucks when you recommend something to your friends and then they don't like it. It happens. We all have different tastes. But it would suck, right? Like if I told my friend to read this because this is my favorite manga and they didn't like it. Granted, there are very select friends I would actually probably tell to read this just because of how graphic it is. And I'd have to know that they're actually interested in this sort of genre.
So essentially the basic plot of the story is it takes place in Japan surrounding the Yakuza. And well, there's this group of guys, these outcasts, who are basically pulling a fast one on almost the entire Yakuza organization.
Ah, yes, the Yakuza organization trademark. I know it well. I don't think this guy knows a whole lot about the Yakuza just based on this video. Because the Yakuza isn't just one quote-unquote organization, it's several different families, kind of like the Mafia. There's many different Yakuza, so I think calling it the Yakuza organization is a little bit strange. Maybe he means this particular organization and it just came off that way. I'll give him a little bit of benefit of the doubt there. But if he did mean, like, as one organization, the Yakuza's not one organization.
Or at least the sector where they live.
See, with that clarification, it makes me think he thinks that the Yakuza was just one big gang, which it absolutely wasn't.
There's a pimp in the group, there's another guy in the group, there was this heroin addict in the group, there's this old man who's kind of pulling the strings behind everything, and then we have our protagonist, Ichi, hence Ichi the Killer. Now, Ichi is kind of interesting as a protagonist sometimes, at least at first, because
I think Ichi stays interesting throughout. I love Ichi as a character. I mean, granted, again, it's my favorite manga, so of course I do. But I found him fascinating throughout.
Because you see these absolute brutal slaughters and murders, but when you meet Ichi, he's this really nice guy, but apparently he has this trauma in the past that kind of causes him to kind of snap into a different state when killing.
Well, it's not only that, but he also has the mind of a child. Ichi doesn't have, like, the mental capacity of a grown man. He's not developmentally fully there. I don't know if you mentioned that in this video, because I haven't watched it all the way through. We're going through this together in a way. But I do think it is worth mentioning, absolutely, that Ichi has the mind of the child, which makes him more prone to manipulation, and makes him more willing to accept things that someone who is more well-developed and more, like, well-adjusted wouldn't.
clearly being manipulated by the old man, but then it all kind of just goes downhill and goes from kind of cool concept to just extremely distasteful.
Okay, so he's gonna get mad at it for being distasteful, which, as we all know, I don't give a shit if something is tasteless. I love a good tasteless thing here and there. I do think that there is a such thing as being too distasteful. I don't think Ichi the Killer is one of those things. There's so much more distasteful shit out there. But again, the scale on which you find something too distasteful is also kind of subjective, because I think that everyone does have their limit. That limit changes for people as they get older. I myself have been very desensitized to a lot of stuff, so a lot of things many people would find distasteful, I'm just like, whatever.
Borderline cringe. Because
Fuck you!
You're borderline cringe.
Because on the other side of the group, and long story short, one of the parts of the Yakuza groups kind of get, like, kicked out, essentially, outcasted, and so now he's on his own with his own special team, which, by the way, is the guy in the thumbnail, and that guy is kind of like Ichi, although Ichi's the sadist, supposedly.
What do you mean, supposedly? Ichi is very clearly a sadist when you actually hear some of the shit he says and thinks when he's out doing the killing. And not to mention the fact that it actually turns him on when he's doing it.
And this guy is the ultimate masochist. So
yeah, Kakihara is the ultimate masochist. They balance each other out. They're two opposite sides of the same coin. I think it's fucking cool.
when he finds out about Ichi and how much of a phenomenal killer he is, of course the guy gets kind of excited by it. And that's really where the extremely distasteful cringe portion of the manga plays in.
What you would call distasteful cringe, I would call fucked up and fascinating.
Because before getting into this manga, I had read specific stories about the Yakuza, and so their brutality was not a new concept to me. However, the way that it's portrayed in this manga is almost impossible to take seriously.
I mean, I would agree that it's very over the top and overt, but I think that, it is a manga, so I don't expect it to be, like, 100% realistic. But there's nothing in it that's inherently, like, insane and, like, impossible in it. Like, I mean, it's not like it exists in a complete and total fantasy world.
It's very tongue-in-cheek, and it kind of really ruins the tone of things.
I disagree. I think that the tongue-in-cheek aspects of it can be very interesting. I don't know necessarily that I agree that it's completely tongue-in-cheek, but I do see what you mean with kind of the tone of it, and I think that the tone of it just kind of adds to the effect of, just how morally fucked up this story is.
Some of the facial expressions are extremely goofy and completely absurd.
Yeah, I'll give him that one. The facial expressions are pretty fucking weird in this series.
And if for you they kind of set the moment cool, for me they just instantly killed the moment.
I think for me it depends. Sometimes I think it was really well-fitting to the moment. A lot of the times it did make me laugh, I'm not gonna lie, but I don't think that ruined it for me either.
It really comes off over time as just a bunch of pee-pee gore humor.
Gore, yes. Pee-pee gore humor. I don't even know what the fuck you mean by that. Like, I mean, yeah, there's, like, genitals getting, like, ripped apart and shit. And, like, it's violent. It's fucked up. Because, like, there's, like, a lot of violent torture, and there is some, like, sexual content, obviously. Like I said, I think this series comes really close to being an Iroguro series, even if it's not considered one. It's definitely up there. But I don't necessarily think that the gore is played up for laughs. I think it's played up for gore and shock value. Like, occasionally there are some things that are probably intended to be comedic, but I think you're overplaying that just a little bit.
And it's just really stale after a while. And
well, again, I just disagree with that. I don't think it gets stale. I think it gets more interesting the longer it goes on, because it gets more brutal. And there's some good mystery to it, too, which he's not even mentioning. There's a lot of mysterious stuff in this story that never even gets fully answered, which I think is actually a good thing, because I think it's actually gives you something to think about at the end. Like the origin of Gigi. Who is this guy? Because we don't know anything about him. And I think that these mystery aspects and more in-depth parts of the plot, he's just kind of overlooking just because he can't get over the fact that there's gore in it.
there's not like some super complex narrative.
False.
As I said, there's some mystery and stuff. I think he's completely wrong. I think the narrative's very interesting.
To help kind of counterbalance all of this and say that there's some positive, the narrative is extremely straightforward and...
Okay, two things. As I've said, there is mystery to the narrative, which he's just overlooking. There's a lot of things that are very interesting, and the psychology of it's super complex. But on top of that, there's nothing necessarily wrong with a straightforward narrative either. There are elements of this that are straightforward, but I would argue that it's not straightforward at all because we never actually fully understand the motivations behind a lot of different characters involved.
So all you're left with is this over-the-top, absurd, extremely distasteful execution.
Again, I don't think that's all you're left with, but again, also, I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with being distasteful.
The only somewhat intriguing thing that you could kind of invest yourself in is, again, Ichi's mind and wondering why he is the way he is.
I would say that's not the only thing that's interesting, but also I would say it's not just Ichi's mind that's fascinating. Kakihara's mind, Gigi, Like, all of the characters have interesting outlooks that are completely unique and fucked up.
But once it's kind of presented, you feel extremely underwhelmed by it, or at least that was me. I don't know.
Well, it certainly wasn't me. I thought it was a great roller coaster of trying to figure out what the fuck was going on inside this twisted fuck's head.
No, when reading this, it's kind of like, cool story, bro, and it's hard to take serious at all for anything that it does try to present.
I just completely disagree. I fundamentally disagree with that statement.
Now, if you do read it, it's not the longest story. It's only like 10 quote-unquote volumes, although those volumes do just feel like super long chapters. They don't really feel like their own giant individual volumes at all.
That's actually a common thing with manga, is where the volumes feel like big long chapters. Violence Jack did a lot, where the chapters themselves were like 200 pages apiece.
So it doesn't really give as much time to kind of delve into some of the aspects of the manga that I wish it had. And so
I disagree. I think it gives plenty of attention and time to a lot of the things that are really cool and intriguing. Like, granted, it doesn't answer all the questions, but I like not being spoon-fed everything. I like sometimes having some things be left a little open and ambiguous.
So it's not only me seeing maybe the potential at certain parts within the story that it doesn't expand upon, but then what it does expand upon and present, again, is just extremely distasteful.
Again, this guy really likes using the word distasteful. It's like Phantom Strider with mean-spirited. He really just likes throwing that out there.
It's the worst seinen as a demographic has to offer, all packed into one manga.
Well, again, I feel like it's the best seinen has to offer, so I disagree wholeheartedly.
Now look, I understand the setting is the Yakuza, and the Yakuza were infamous for being pretty terrible.
You do know that the Yakuza's still around, right? Like, they're nowhere near as prominent as they used to be, and they've kind of been pushed back to be a much smaller influence than they once were. But they're still around. It's not like they just went away. They're still there.
Mind you, right? But again, there's a way to present that, and I don't feel like this manga does that at all.
Again, I don't think that things need to hold back on being fucked up and over the top. I see no reason to. So again, I think we just disagree there on what can and can't be distasteful. Because again, I don't think it's inherently distasteful to show crime being fucked up. That's just crime.
If this manga was a song, it would be those super over-the-top, edgy, nothing but bass songs that every 14-year-old girl loves listening to.
Shut up!
Hey, you know what? Fuck you. How about that?
Because those songs seem to kind of make a fetish of depression and darkness in this really weird way. And ironically, that's exactly what Ichi the Killer does with its characters.
While I do kind of admit it definitely is very primalistic, animalistic, and even fetishized in some regards in this manga, that just adds to sort of the dirty, fucked up feeling you get when reading it, which in all honesty is part of what makes it so cool in my opinion.
Essentially, imagine a manga where every single character was almost like Hisoka.
Who the fuck is that?
And now, take away the shonen limitations of it.
It would help if I knew what the fuck you're talking about.
But now Hisoka's free to do literally whatever he wants within a story.
Who the hell are you talking about? You act like I'm supposed to know who this is.
And listen, some of y'all might think that might be, I mean in the worst ways possible. And look, okay, I might be exaggerating a little bit because it's not every single character, but it is the two primary that we see throughout the majority of this series.
Look, as I said in my Ichi the Killer review, I don't think that there's a single quote-unquote good person in the series. I think it's all kind of fucked up, but that's why I love it.
You see, that's where my issue truly lies, is that's all there is to those two primary characters. The primary protagonist of the story and the primary antagonist of the story are nothing but a bunch of perverted weirdos who get turned on by fighting, blood, and death. And look,
while I would say that is a large part of their character, I do think that's an oversimplification. I think that is a lot of what they have going for them, but Ichi also has the childlike aspects of him, how really nice he is outside of when he's going and doing the killing. And Kakihara did actually care about his boss that was killed prior to that, so there is a little bit more to it than that, but he is right that that is a large part of their characterization. I just think he's oversimplifying it and leaving out some of the other aspects of them.
With Ichi, you could argue there's a little more to him since he does have that other more human side to him. But
well, there we go. He mentioned that with Ichi, but there you go.
Most of the time, he's just kind of this giant infant running around killing people because he's upset. And the other guy, the antagonist of the story, there's nothing else to him. That's his one character trait, is that he's a masochist.
Again, it's a large part of who he is, but I don't think that's his one character trait. I think that's a gross oversimplification.
There are other things within the manga that I'm trying to point out positives for, but in the end, in comparison to a lot of its other competitors within the same demographic, if you will, Ichi the Killer's artwork is mediocre most of the time.
I could not disagree more. I think the artwork's actually really good in Ichi the Killer. I don't know why he thinks the artwork is mediocre.
Like, the buildings are done well and all that, don't get me wrong, but for the most part, a lot of the characters just don't look right.
I'm not 100% sure what you mean by look right. They do look a little off with some of their weird faces and stuff, but I think that's kind of the point. I think they look fine. Unless he's saying they don't look consistently designed, but I disagree with that too. They're very expressive. They have a wide range of expressions they make, and I think that's part of what makes the art so unique in Ichi the Killer, is the wide range of, like, over-the-top expressions.
And it's not like with Kaiji where you could look at the exaggerated faces and say that it adds to the emotion.
I'm not sure what Kaiji is, but I disagree. I'd say it does. I think it adds to it quite a bit.
Here, again, it just makes it seem very corny when it's meant to be, I think, taken seriously.
I mean, yeah, some of the designs can be really goofy with some of the stuff, but I don't know that it's necessarily meant to be taken completely wholesale seriously.
This manga gets really old really fast. Like, you're gonna reach the halfway point and be like, okay, can we hurry it up now and just get this over with?
I disagree. The second I started reading it, I couldn't put it down. So, again, I completely have to disagree.
Yes, I know, shocking.
If there were any redeeming qualities of the manga, I guess is that Ichi is, again, somewhat of a cool protagonist.
Again, I think Ichi's a great protagonist.
There are some really cool and brutal moments within the manga.
I agree, the brutality is part of why I really like it.
Most of the other moments are just kind of cringe, and again, it just feels like the author ran out of ideas and ways to show the brutality of the Yakuza.
Again, I have to disagree. It's very creative. There's a bunch of unique deaths and stuff in this series. Like, Ichi, yeah, he has the thing where he slices the people up with his blades on his feet. There's the oil torture scene with Kakihara dumping the oil on the guy while he's on those hooks. There's a lot of other torture scenes with those two big twin guys torturing people and doing all sorts of horrible shit. So I just have to disagree again.
Somewhat of a cool thing where Ichi was meant to take care of the son of a friend he had made who was working for the other team that he ends up having to deal with.
Yeah, Takeshi. I think Takeshi was a very interesting part of the story.
But then that kid ends up taking Ichi's place, so we never really get any true closure with Ichi's character anyways.
Well, I mean, Ichi is out of that life now, and then Takeshi takes his place because Gigi sinks his hooks in him and starts manipulating him now.
And then it doesn't seem like there's anything special about him because then this kid kind of has the same thing as Ichi.
I disagree, because Ichi was a lot more childlike and not really all there in the head. Takeshi doesn't seem like he's not all there. He's just manipulated because Gigi's a very good manipulator.
As the old man is just using him for money and stuff like that. And again, I don't think it's entirely a bad concept, but just one that's thrown out there, and that's it.
Again, I thought it was done really well.
The beginning is intriguing, the protagonist is semi-interesting, it's brutal, it's dark, it's a fast-paced story, but other than that, it doesn't really have anything to offer.
Yeah, but you just listed off plenty to offer, so again, I'm not sure why you're so critical of it. Like, I understand being critical, and I understand there are flaws in this story, don't get me wrong. But I think you're a lot more overly harsh than maybe is justified in the way it's written. That said, I can see why he comes to some of the conclusions he does. I just have to disagree wholesale with a lot of the points he makes because, frankly, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me having read the series. Not to mention, as I said, it's my favorite manga, so obviously I'm biased there, but I do really like it.
I'm sorry for a bit of a negative video. I usually like most of the manga that you guys recommend me, but this was one of the rare cases where I really didn't like it at all.
Which, I mean, that's fair. Again, I can understand why someone would be put off by this, but I do think that he is overly harsh.
Again, just like I said at the beginning of the video, make sure you check it out if you are interested and come up with your own thoughts and conclusions on the series. Don't just take my word for it.
And I'd have to agree, because we both came with completely different takes, so if you haven't read it, I would highly recommend you do, just to get your own take that might be different than either my take or his. That's all we got for this episode of Redeye Responds, but it was about something that I do really like, so hopefully you've enjoyed. This has been Fugitive Redeye. Have a good one. Toodles.
Bye! Looks like you're going to the Shadow Realm, Jimbo.